I mean, last year was downright abysmal, and everybody was still cautiously optimistic. But I didn't hear that once, and I think sentiment all around is really positive.
Hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics, and excited to have a new guest on the show, although someone I've been friends with for quite a while, and perhaps more significantly to the audience, runs the Mining Stock Daily, and that is Trevor Hall. So we're going to dig into the mining stocks a little bit today, rather than just hearing me talk about how I think silver is going to go up, which Trevor's always amazed if I make it through, because he's here in Denver with me, and he's amazed if I make it through an outing without mentioning silver manipulation, which we will leave aside for today. Real quick before we get started, hit that subscribe button so you can stay posted and know about things like what's going on in the mining stock world before Wall Street can even spell gold and silver. So with that said, Trevor, a pleasure to welcome you on in here today. And how's everything going, my friend?
Chris, things are going great. Thank you so much for having me on the show. And to be honest with you, it's been a real pleasure watching you start put out a lot more content. And, I guess as a friend, I'm real proud of you, buddy. You're doing great.
Well, I sure appreciate that. And it's been really nice getting to know you and seeing you at a lot of these conferences. I'm wondering, by the way, before we start, did you happen to catch the last week's interview with Denver Dave, where we found out that his hair is actually real and is not, he gave us a sample on the show.
Yeah, his hair's a little something. It'd be interesting to see it, on a windy day on the tennis court, to see how it distracts him from his game, huh?
Well, I'm going to get down there with my camera one of these days and capture that important scoop. And for everyone out there saying, all right, enough with the comedy, although fortunately it was nice catching up with you at the Vancouver Resource Investment Conference. Geez, was that last week or 2 weeks ago already now?
Last week.
But again, a lot of folks that watch the show into gold and silver, looking for ways to get leverage on the move, which leads them into the mining stocks, which is your area of expertise. And perhaps to kick off, any thoughts from the shows? I know you talked to just about everyone at these conferences, so curious what your reaction was.
Yeah, I definitely think there was a lot of optimism. We dropped the word cautious from the last couple of years. It seemed like, for the last 3 years that I've become more involved in going to these conferences, it's always been cautious optimism. Well, I mean, last year was downright abysmal, and everybody was still cautiously optimistic. But I didn't hear that once, and I think sentiment all around is really positive. I mean, obviously we saw a good jump in the precious metal prices all around. I mean, not just gold and silver, but palladium as well. We can don't need to say much about that. But so I think there's a lot more. It was interesting, especially at VRIC. There seemed like there was a lot more younger people there than had been in previous. And, I don't have anything to back this up other than my own observation. So there's a little bit more diversity. And even going back when I was last fall, when I was at the Beaver Creek Precious Metals Summit, it almost seemed like a lot more institutional smart money people were in attendance to start thinking about where they're going to be allocating their money. I know, the precious metals and the miners, that optimism is there, but I think there's a point of the overall markets that they're not so optimistic about right now. There's a lot of concern. And so I think that's where the transition is. And we're going to see it. I think if we've already seen smart money come in, and if we're seeing institutional money come in already, if it hasn't already, next leverage is retail. But I don't think we're seeing the big retail money come in yet. So that's not going to, so I think we're still early in a bull market in that aspect.
Yeah, I like that you described cautious optimism. I get the feeling that, especially perhaps with the fund managers, there's a lot of folks sitting out there, at least the ones that have interest in the gold and silver space, which I think is still a large minority, small minority, maybe better way to phrase that. But I think there's a lot of people that see, all right, well, the prices of gold and silver are higher, but they're wondering, is this another false start, perhaps similar to 2016? Sure enough, as we're recording this on Tuesday at the end, what is today's date? January 28th. Both gold and silver have been hammered pretty thoroughly this morning. Do you feel like people are getting in yet? Or, I mean, like you said, cautiously optimistic, but have they actually committed money to it yet?
I think people are starting to commit money to it. I do think there's a lot of people who remember 2016 and are not jumping all in yet, maybe starting to dabble a little bit more. And just I've been getting inquiries from friends, from college, and I stayed in touch with, via social media, but I don't stay in touch with regularly, who have dropped me notes asking me about investing in precious metals or investing in miners. And so from an observation point, I think people are very much aware of what to do. And I think one of the reasons is, Chris. So I am 38 years old. 38? Yeah. No, 37, excuse me. And I think about where I was 10 years ago when the recession hit. And 27 years old, thinking I was going to go out there and start a career. I was living in Chicago at the time. Watched the economy collapse, the recession hit, and to be quite frank, I was nothing but an observer of the entire thing, because I had nothing to lose. Like I wasn't making shit for money, right? So I had nothing to lose, but I saw all this happen.
Yeah.
And now 10 years forward, like my whole life is different, right? I'm married, I have kids, I have a house. I have a lot more to protect right now. And so I think, as from an observer 10 years ago, you saw what the stock market did, what the economy did, and what precious metals did at the same time. And you can take those observations and the lessons learned and really start hedging now. And I think people, at least I hope to think, a lot of people are smart enough to understand the difference between where they were then and where they are now, and why precious metals and miners are not only a good way to hedge and protect your wealth, but also potentially create more wealth and value for yourself in the miners. And that's kind of how I play it. And I do think that that's one of the main reasons a lot of younger people are starting to get more interest in this sector.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I wonder if one of the effects of that, what we saw over the past decade, where, yeah, I get it, if you're working for Honeywell or Boeing and you still have a six-figure salary, you're getting your 5 or 10% raise, your stock portfolio's going up. To that guy, things may seem normal, whereas I wonder what it's like for kids who are graduating college that have a mortgage of a student loan, and a lot of these corporate jobs have been shrinking and going away, which perhaps makes it easier for them, because I think that's how the markets and life works, where sometimes we see things when we're forced to see it. We've seen younger people get into the cryptos. And I find people who are into the cryptos, when you give them the argument for the metals, usually they're very receptive to it. And when you actually look at the fundamentals and what's going on with repo lines and the Federal Reserve gone wild, it paints a pretty clear picture, does it not, for the metals and the miners, assuming that you have the patience to wait?
I do think it paints a pretty good picture. I think one of the difficulties is the old school thought of, well, if I'm going to own physical metal, like I have to have it on me and where I live, where a lot of young people are very mobile. They don't necessarily want to have all this stuff, and that would include precious metals, as hard as that would seem. But the nice thing to know is there are companies out there that are utilizing things like the blockchain. Yep. That will back your physical metal purchase. And I actually have used that before, and hold precious metal holdings in a blockchain format through a company called One Gold, and that I really like. But I also own, my own physical metal as well. But I do think it's one of those things to where, like, I know all the purists and traditionalists of precious metal think, well, you have to have your metal, you have to have it allocated in certain spots. Well, I mean, that comes with fees, that comes with storage fees, and like, most people only get a Netflix account for 2 months to finish whatever episodes they want to watch, and then they'll ditch the account and go to Amazon to watch some other show, right? So like, they don't want to be just beholden to the same purchase every day, and that's how consumerism has changed, right? And that has a direct implication of how people hold physical metal. And I think that's nice that we're seeing that change a little bit with things like the blockchain. But we will see. I do think if we get more price movement, if we can get above 1,600 and stay there, I do think we're going to see a lot more people move in to precious metals, whether it be physical ordering or something through a digital platform like OneGold.
Yeah, and then interesting, of course, how people jump in after the price has gone up rather than when it's low, which perhaps is just the day and age we live in. Yet along those lines of things that happen with $1,600 gold, with silver higher than it was this morning. Yet I get the feeling, and I know you talk with a lot of these mining companies. It was nice being there with you and seeing how you interact with some of them, that even though perhaps maybe the guys who are waiting for $50 silver aren't dancing in the streets yet, but even the move we saw last year really has quite an impact on the margins of a lot of these miners.
Yeah, it absolutely does. We kind of laugh if you weren't making money at 1,250 gold, and you're not making money at 1,500 gold, you're probably not making any money. That's a tough project. That's a tough project to sell. So we are, especially with the big boys, the big miners. I think Q3 was the first quarter of $1,500 gold. So we actually got to see some of those big boys and how they were, what the production and financials were with the big spot price move for a full quarter. And again, in Q4, those production numbers, financials are trickling down. So we'll see. What will happen is we'll see if some of the movement in the big miners can actually start trickling down to the mid tiers, and where I like to start playing and put some of my money. But what we haven't really seen yet is that investment money go down to the juniors and the explorers. Right. They have not moved in correlation with the price of gold and silver, unfortunately. They are still very much undervalued. Their valuations compared to decades of this, and you can always listen. Dave Kranzler and I go into conversations about this a lot. But as long as those juniors are still undervalued, which as they are now, and the money hasn't trickled down to them, there's a great opportunity there for people to really get a bang for their buck, because if this gold market persists and continues to go up, those juniors are just going to go ape shit. Yep. And that's what they did. That's what they did in the past. I mean, all you have to do is look at charts from 10 years ago. And I might point out that, like I play the mining and the junior exploration sector to create my own wealth. Like, my goal is to make more money, but I buy and invest in precious metals as a hedge to preserve my wealth. So that's kind of how my outlook is. So I'm really excited. I think there's a really good shot for people in the junior mining sector in the next 2 to 4 years. Yep. To make a lot of money.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Especially, I like what you point out, where anytime people don't like this sector for whatever reason it is, if people just don't like something, I mean, sometimes there's a reason, but often that means it's undervalued if people aren't getting into it yet. And that podcast you did with Dave a while ago, you were talking about how a lot of the bigger projects have moved, but not the smaller ones. Along those lines, I also hear a lot of folks mention that for some of the majors that have certain commitments of how much gold they have to get to the market, or silver, of course, that it's harder for them to find significant deposits so that they will be looking at some of these smaller companies, and we may see more deals and takeovers. Is that your feel as well?
Oh yeah, I mean the majors are depleting their assets faster than they can replace them, and that's been the story for years. And the one of the big reasons we're seeing more mergers, we saw more, two big mergers, is because there's not enough of those big tier 1 million ounce deposits in the world that's easily accessible with a decent capex, and all in sustaining costs for them to make it worth their while. So it almost seems like the companies are thinking merger is a better way to go, and that is an issue. Now, it's there are a few massive deposits out there. One of the big issues is the capex to build those, or the all-in sustaining cost means you're going to have to spend a lot more money, or your return on your investment is not going to pay off for a long while. And the market, we see it. The market wants immediate, fast returns, big money as quickly as they can, and so that's an issue. And that's one of the reasons why I do think I had this discussion last week with a number of people. That's why I think a lot of these near surface, low grade oxide gold heap leach projects are back in business, because those projects can easily become cash flowing with minimal capex compared to these big open pit hard rock projects, right? So a great project with my buddy Doug Ramshaw from Minera Alamos. I mean, that's a company I invested in early, and because I saw what their business strategy was, and it looked like they could get the Santana project up and running pretty dang quickly with a low capex and start producing. Well, he's stuck with what they do, and it looks like they're going to deliver it. And so I think if you get cash flow, not only you're not an exploration company anymore, you're a cash flowing business. And I think that's a better sell for investors who need something tangible to see. They need to see what production numbers were, how much money and cash flow were coming into the company, and what's the next quarter, or what's the guidance for next quarter or next year. And then so when people can start looking at it as a business, as a cash flow, I think you'll get more money there. But those companies that just have a project and rock in the ground that they think can be economically mineable, that's going to be a harder sell, because a lot of cases you're running on 500 cc's of hopium.
Yep. Although, which again, if you can analyze things well, obviously there's a risk reward. The earlier you get in on the good projects,
Absolutely.
obviously you can have the higher upside, which leads us to the portion where now Trevor is going to share exactly which stocks miners should buy and which ones are going to go up the most. Although, no, I'm just teasing. Yet, perhaps a different way of getting, somewhere along those lines for people who might be new to the mining stocks and they're looking at all these different projects that are out there. Can you pass along some things to think about, or what do you look at when you see 10 companies and you're saying, which ones am I interested or not? What are some guidelines that you put in place?
I would call the management team of each one of those companies and get to know them first. I've put my money into companies and glad and really proud that I've been working with companies that I know, and I can call up or shoot an email and get a pretty quick and honest response, and that's really important. And you're not going to get that in a lot of other industries that you put your money behind. And that's one of the beautiful things about investing in junior exploration. So do that first. And then I also think you got to have, be willing to educate yourself a little bit. When I jumped into this industry, I didn't know shit from shit, other than I wanted to learn about mining and learn how exploration works, and then learn about the capital markets and how it's used to invest these projects and what the upside was. Understand how the project looks. What's the difference between sulfide and oxide gold? What's the difference between hard rock, metallurgical processes compared to maybe an oxide heap leach, and what's that mean for capex, for building projects? understand what a good assay looks like, what drill assays look like, and know that it's always easiest. Like if you can spend the time every day to read these press releases and follow the story, that's great. And I know not everybody has the time. Fortunately, few of us are stupid enough to make a living out of all this, and that's what we do. I watch the news releases every morning as I produce Mining Stock Daily. And I know not everybody can do that. That's why I do produce Mining Stock Daily. So it's an easy, consumable medium to digest information. Then you can take that and do your own due diligence and move forward. But there's some great newsletter writers out there, right? So, Denver Dave. There's a handful of people out there that create really good publications that will, feed you their thoughts and their analysis, which, we'll be honest, are much better than what I could ever create as far as a newsletter writer can do. I'm more of a purist journalist, I guess, in that sense. And those are available, and you should subscribe to them. You should find one you really like and subscribe to them. And that's, I think that's probably the best case. No, you're not this knowledge gap isn't going to be filled overnight. In fact, it might take longer than a year, but the sooner you start, the better you're going to be off as this bull market continues to move forward, and probably get the best bang for your buck where you put your money.
I think that's good advice, Trevor. And again, makes sense where I know even as I read some of these mining journals and I'm here, it's like speaking a new language, which there are times I feel overwhelmed a little bit. And then I remember just, whatever you let sink in, just keep going at it. And over time, rather than trying to learn everything in one night, it does start to make more sense. And I guess it comes down to what people are really looking for. To me, it just seemed like the value in gold and silver and then in the miners is going to be that immense and worthwhile whenever the prices do move. I mean, it's not like the debt's coming down or the Federal Reserve isn't making a complete mockery out of our financial system. So what that leaves us with is a great opportunity, because think about all the other people who are focused on Tesla and Facebook, and it's a great chance to get a head start. And if I'm correct about the future of the metals, then you really, by the time this stuff happens, you have a base of knowledge, can work out really well. Perhaps the last thing in closing that I'd mention is that while I was joking before about Trevor telling you which are the best mining stocks, again, you interview a lot of these companies on the Mining Stock Daily podcast, which I love listening to. And again, if people are new and want to get some insight in there, it is a great resource you offer, and perhaps you could just let folks know where to find you.
Yeah, you can always find me at miningstockdaily.com. Got a great list of growing archive from previous shows. You can subscribe to that podcast on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Alexa, 12 different networks, anywhere you get your podcasts. So that's where you can find me. You can also email me, trevor@clearcreekdigital.com. So it's been quite a run. It started out as just kind of a little pet project over a year and a half ago, and it's actually making a living out of it, which is kind of fantastic. Actually, it's not kind of, it's really fantastic.
Yeah.
So, Chris, I wanted to mention something to you before we left, because I had this pulled up. I thought it was really interesting. I saw this on Twitter, quoted Rick Rule, and I reached out to Rick last night and got a response from this morning. He's like, "Hey, do you care if I use these numbers, and quote you on?" He's saying, "Yeah, no problem." He said that inbound retail inquiries for Sprott U.S. holdings for precious metals, the last 3 months of 2019, they had about 2,000 inquiries. Get this. 40% came from outside of U.S. and Canada. Here's the numbers that really surprised me. 65% were under 40 years old and 30% were female. So if one of the largest institutions for precious metals is sharing these numbers, I think it goes to show us that demographic is really starting to move in. It's not, how do we reach them? They're already here. They're moving in fast.
I agree, and it makes sense because I find it's not really a matter of some complex derivative mathematics here, but really just how objective can we be? You look at the debt, you look at the Fed and all these things, you see stock markets at all-time highs, and when you piece things together, it does make a lot of sense, which is what both of us try and help point out to folks, not telling anybody what to do, but just saying, hey, what you're hearing from the government, what you're hearing from the Federal Reserve at these press conferences, it doesn't make sense to me. And for all those folks who wonder, well, what can I actually do about it? These are the companies that are out providing a solution, the monetary part. And I appreciate that you cover them. I appreciate that you've been on the show. Appreciate you've been a good friend to me, and it's been nice getting to know you. And
Same to you, buddy. Same to you, Chris.
Well, I will look forward to doing this again soon. And thanks again for joining me today, sir.
Thanks, Chris. Take care of yourself, buddy.
All right. Trevor Hall of the Mining Stock Daily. Go check it out, folks. And Trevor, we'll talk to you again soon. So that is today's episode. I do thank you for spending some time with me and hope you enjoyed it. If so, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you again soon.